Welcome to this lecture on the fundamentals of genetics. Today, we are going to explore a fascinating topic, nuclear versus extranuclear inheritance. You might think that all of your traits come from the DNA safely locked away in the center of your cells, but nature has a few surprises for us. We will uncover the hidden instruction manuals that exist outside the nucleus and see how they shape everything from human health to the food we grow. Let us dive in and discover how this dual system of inheritance actually works. To begin our journey, I want you to think of a living cell as a massive, bustling city. In the center of this city is a giant, highly secure central library called the nucleus. For a long time, scientists believed that absolutely all instructions for building the city came from this central library. But if you look closely at the city's power plants, known as mitochondria, and its solar farms, known as chloroplasts, you will find something amazing. They actually have their own secret, tiny stash of instruction manuals. This means that not all of your traits are decided by the central library. Understanding why these power plants have their own DNA is the first step to mastering cellular inheritance. Now that we understand the city analogy, let us look at how the central library operates. Nuclear inheritance refers to the transmission of genes that are located on chromosomes strictly within the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell. These are the genes that follow the classic rules discovered by Gregor Mendel. When a new organism is formed, it receives exactly half of its nuclear DNA from the mother and half from the father. Because both parents contribute equally to this genetic blueprint, we call this system biparental. This equal sharing is the foundation of traditional genetics, but as we will see, it is not the whole story. Since we just established how nuclear genes are shared equally, what happens to the genes outside the nucleus? Extranuclear inheritance, also known as cytoplasmic inheritance, refers to the transmission of genes that reside completely outside the nucleus, specifically within organelles like mitochondria and chloroplasts. Unlike nuclear genes, these extranuclear genes completely ignore Mendelian rules. Instead of a 50-50 split, they are typically inherited from just one parent, almost always the mother. Why? Because the female egg cell provides the vast majority of the cytoplasm to the newly formed zygote, while the tiny sperm contributes almost nothing but its nuclear DNA. Knowing that we have two different inheritance systems, you might wonder why this distinction is so important. Understanding the difference is absolutely critical in modern medicine and agriculture. If we only relied on nuclear inheritance, we would be completely unable to explain why certain severe metabolic diseases are passed down exclusively from mothers to all of their children. In human medicine, mitochondrial diseases are a direct result of mutated extranuclear DNA. In agriculture, plant breeders use extranuclear inheritance to create cytoplasmic male sterility in crops like corn, preventing self-pollination and helping farmers produce high-yield hybrid seeds. Without this knowledge, modern biology would simply not make sense. To formalize what we have discussed about these two systems, let us look at the mathematical representation of genetic contribution. This formula shows where the total genetic makeup of a newly formed offspring comes from. G sub T represents the total genetic makeup of the zygote. Inside the parentheses, we have 1/2 N sub M plus 1/2 N sub P. These represent the equal nuclear DNA contributed by the mother and the father, showing biparental inheritance. Then we add E sub M, which represents the extranuclear DNA coming entirely from the mother. Notice there is absolutely no paternal extranuclear term here. If the mother's extranuclear DNA contains a mutation, the offspring inherits it, regardless of the father's genes. Now that we have our formula, let us apply the nuclear portion to a classic example. We are given a homozygous tall pea plant mother with the nuclear genotype T, crossed with a homozygous dwarf father with genotype t. We need to find the genetic contribution and phenotype of the first generation. Because plant height is controlled by genes inside the nucleus, we use the nuclear part of our equation. The mother provides one T allele, and the father provides one t allele. Combining these gives us the heterozygous genotype T. Since the tall trait is dominant, the final physical phenotype of the plant will be tall. Having solved the standard cross, we must now prove a fundamental property of nuclear inheritance: symmetry. We want to prove that the sex of the parent holding the trait does not change the final outcome. To do this, we set up a reciprocal cross. This means we completely reverse the sexes of our previous example. Now, the mother is the dwarf plant with the t genotype, meaning she provides the cytoplasm and a recessive allele. The father is the tall plant with the T genotype. Let us see how this changes the mathematics in the next step. Continuing with our reciprocal cross, we apply the exact same mathematical logic. The mother now contributes the t allele, and the father contributes the T allele. When we add 1/2 t and 1/2 T, we get the exact same heterozygous genotype, T. The offspring will still grow to be tall. This perfect mathematical symmetry is the definitive proof that nuclear inheritance is completely independent of which parent provided the cytoplasm. The central library does not care whether a book came from the mother or the father. It reads them exactly the same way. Since we just proved that nuclear inheritance is perfectly symmetrical, let us look at the mathematical rule for extranuclear inheritance, which breaks that symmetry. The formula is incredibly simple but powerful. P sub O equals P sub M. Here, P sub O represents the physical phenotype of the offspring, and P sub M represents the physical phenotype of the female parent, the mother. Notice that the father's phenotype is completely absent from this equation. Because the male gamete only provides a nucleus and no chloroplasts or mitochondria, we completely ignore the father's traits when dealing with extranuclear inheritance. The offspring's physical appearance for these specific traits will perfectly match the mother. Let us put this simple formula to the test with a real example involving the 4 o'clock plant. In this plant, leaf color is determined by the chloroplasts located outside the nucleus. We are given a female plant with white leaves, pollinated by a male plant with green leaves. We need to find the leaf color of the offspring. Because the mother plant has white leaves, her egg cells contain mutant chloroplasts that can't produce green chlorophyll. The father's green pollen only contributes a nucleus, which can't help the chloroplasts. Applying our formula, P sub O equals P sub M, we look exclusively at the mother. Therefore, 100% of the offspring will have white leaves. To truly prove that this is extranuclear inheritance, we must perform a reciprocal cross, just like we did for the nuclear traits. This time, we reverse the parents, so the mother is green and the father is white. Now, the mother's egg provides healthy green chloroplasts in the cytoplasm. The father's white trait is trapped in his nucleus and cannot affect the chloroplasts. Using our formula, the offspring phenotype equals the mother's phenotype, so all the offspring will be perfectly green. Unlike nuclear inheritance, which gave us the exact same result both times, here we get a dramatic difference. This asymmetry in reciprocal crosses is the ultimate mathematical and physical proof of extranuclear inheritance. To bring all these concepts and formulas together, let us look at this diagram of fertilization. On the left, you see the large maternal egg cell. Notice that it contains both a nucleus with maternal nuclear DNA and mitochondria floating in the cytoplasm. Approaching it is the tiny paternal sperm cell, which essentially only carries paternal nuclear DNA. When fertilization occurs, look at the resulting zygote on the right. Inside its nucleus, we see biparental nuclear inheritance, a mix of both parents' DNA. But look at the cytoplasm. The mitochondria are exclusively from the mother. This visual perfectly captures why nuclear traits are shared equally, while extranuclear traits are inherited solely from the mother. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us review the key takeaways. First, you must recognize that a cell is much more than just its nucleus. Organelles like mitochondria and chloroplasts hold crucial genetic information. Second, nuclear inheritance follows Mendel's laws, where both parents contribute equally, meaning reciprocal crosses yield identical results. Third, extranuclear inheritance breaks these rules entirely, relying on DNA passed down almost exclusively through the mother's cytoplasm. By mastering both of these systems, you now have the tools to solve complex genetic puzzles, from tracing ancient human ancestry to understanding why certain diseases defy traditional inheritance patterns. Excellent work today.